I've got Joe Wilson first and then Jane Penrose.
I'm Joe Wilson. I live in Ellis Hollow. I'm a retired educator and a recovering lawyer. I'd like to speak to the issue of the fracking ban petitions or the resolution you have before you. You should pass a ban. A fracking ban. Among the many reasons are that industrialized fracking historically brings the following with it to each and every community: roads clogged, roads destroyed, road accidents, polluted air and water, short and long-term diseases, destruction of the outdoors, degradation of traditional sources of income and taxes, rents up, residential property values down, prices for consumables way up, accidents and industrial emergencies up, crime up, causing need for additional law enforcement officers, jail space, courts, and police equipment. The result is that we as taxpayers and you as legislators are faced with a choice between higher taxes or reduced services and a guaranteed lower quality of life. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Jane Penrose and then Bob Howarth.
Good evening. This evening I'm representing concerned citizens of Ulysses. We are a grassroots group currently working to ban heavy industry in our town. Our heavy industry, which currently occupies our attention, happens to be slick water, high volume hydro-fracking, and we applaud your effort to ban this dreadful practice on lands owned by Tompkins County. Looking at the big picture, we see a federal government which has exempted the oil and gas drilling industries from even a modest oversight. America's water and air are fair game for this profit-driven poison industry in every state in our nation, and so our federal government failed to protect us. Our state government has spent years crafting a supplemental generic impact statement, which is widely regarded as a bad joke by even faintly interested in public safety and or the environment. It is now presumably revising this woefully inadequate document. When it reemerges, the public will be given a mere 30 days to review it, after which it will presumably become law. A law that would be enforced by a handful of inspectors in a state in which tens of thousands of gas wells are contemplated. And so our state government has failed to protect us. This is why we in little towns like Ulysses feel we need to protect ourselves either through standalone laws or zoning code alterations against heavy industry such as hydro-fracking. Nobody else can do this for us. And hence we are so heartened to know that our county legislature agrees with us and is standing shoulder to shoulder with us in this battle that we will decide the fate of upstate New York, if not the nation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jane. Bob Howarth and then Lisa Wright.
Bob Howarth. I live in the town of Ulysses. I work for Cornell, and I'm an expert on the environmental consequences of energy systems. I've provided you each with a holdout tonight, a handout. I wanted just briefly to mention one reason. I urge you strongly to support the resolution banning leasing on county land. One of the reasons that I personally am opposed to hydraulic fracturing as it's envisioned at the moment is I think it's actually a bad fuel even for the nation in terms of greenhouse gas warming. We have a paper that's submitted to a peer-reviewed journal. I heard back from the editor earlier today. It looks like our paper will be published this spring. It's in revision at the moment, and I have some work to do before it be published. But this is a summary of the paper. The figure, I think, is fairly self-explanatory. If you watch television at all, or if you read reports, you'll hear that many think shale gas, natural gas in general, but shale gas is a good alternative for our nation's future, that it emits less carbon dioxide than other fuels when it's burned. That's true in the actual burning, but if you want to look at the entire consequences of global warming, you have to look at the emissions of other gases. We've done that. We've looked specifically at the emissions of methane gas, which is a very potent greenhouse gas. What this figure shows in blue is the comparison of Marcellus shale gas on the left with other fossil fuels our society is using or might use. The blue is the direct emissions from burning. The orange to pink colors there, I'm colorblind, excuse me, they're probably violet, show the methane effect in carbon dioxide equivalents. And The amount of methane that will be released from this enterprise is hard to estimate, so there's an unknown range, and we show a lower and higher estimate. But the bottom line is, if you include those estimates, we think that this gas is worse for greenhouse gas warming than is any other fossil fuel available to the United States at the moment. For those of you who are technically inclined, I have a whole bunch of technical comments on the back. I won't go through those. I'd be happy to talk to anyone about it later. The bottom line is that there isn't all that much new in our analysis. This will be the first peer-reviewed report on what the greenhouse gas footprint of shale gas is. There is nothing else out there in the literature. But our findings aren't all that surprising. They're broadly consistent with what's out there in the peer-reviewed literature. Particularly, there's a paper in Science last year showing that methane is a far more powerful greenhouse gas than people had thought previously. We relied on that. I've talked with the IPCC lead authors. They are in agreement with that report, and they agree with how we're using it in our analysis. That's the big breakthrough here. There isn't all that much new in it otherwise. So, again, thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Lisa Wright, and then Ellen Harrison.
Good evening. My name is Lisa Wright, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to address the Tompkins County Legislature tonight. I support the ban resolutions. Over the next several decades, there are predicted to be over 70,000 Marcellus shale gas wells and perhaps many more Utica shale gas wells in New York State. 100 years from now, we will not only have the tens of thousands of known and unknown abandoned conventional wells in New York State, we will also be stuck with more than 100,000 capped Marcellus and Utica shale gas wells with aging plugs, aging cement, aging casing, aging pipelines, dilapidated compressor stations, condensate tanks, and landfills. A New York civil engineer familiar with oil and gas wells says over time a percentage of these wells will most certainly leak. Tens of thousands of unconventional shale gas wells, unconventional meaning mammoth industrial operations that will require a large amount of infrastructure in order to obtain a finite amount of what is touted as a bridge fuel. All of this disruption to our land, water, and ecosystems for a few decades of a non-renewable fuel source. It doesn't take a PhD to figure out that the problems that will be brought on by this scale of gas extraction are not worth the costs. We need to divorce ourselves emotionally from the shale gas bonanza and highly financed misinformation campaigns of the gas industry and soberly look to our collective future. New York State's Climate Change Plan interim report from November 2010 barely touches upon the role of gas in New York State's green future. That's a pretty big oversight considering parties on both sides of the shale extraction debate say that New York's landscape will be significantly transformed by this industry. Additionally, the role of increased methane leakage in an increasingly gas industrialized New York State and United States is likely to be extremely problematic as we address climate change and global warming. So ultimately, what will New York State gain and what will New York State lose from shale gas extraction? Dr. Susan Christofferson of Cornell University is looking into the true economic costs and has already uncovered very problematic findings. It is not clear that New York State will be economically advantaged by shale gas extraction in the long term. Knowing we will be left with over 100,000 plugged and eventually leaking gas wells 50 to 100 years from now, how can we morally justify any short-term so-called gains? So if we can limit shale gas extraction in any way, shape, or form on a county level, that's at least a good start. I applaud the responsible leadership of this legislature on the ban resolutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Ellen Harrison and Adam Laws after Ellen.
I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. I also am speaking in favor of the ban of drilling on county lands. I represent an organization called FLEASED, F-L-E-A-S-E-D, people who signed gas leases before they understood and knew about the kind of drilling we're talking about. People who now want to get out of their leases because they think it's going to be a horrible, both for the environment and for communities. I'm actually here to say I'm proud of all of you, and I'm proud of Tompkins County. I think this legislature understood early on, where that means a couple years ago, it's been a steep learning curve, understood that this is not a slam dunk great economic prospect for our county. And I had a recent experience of going to Bradford County, which is in Pennsylvania, where there's a fair amount of drilling going on. Presentation by the head of one of the 3 county commissioners, an elected official. And he was recounting a lot of the costs Joe was talking about, you know, more in jail spending, more probation, more social services. They were losing staff because the county highway staff were being hired away, the secretaries were being hired away. Lots of economic costs to the county. And a question came from Ken Schlather, who's the head of Tompkins County Cooperative Extension, and he said, how are you paying for all this? And he said, taxpayers. The costs are going to be enormous to many of us. And I applaud you guys for recognizing that early on. I guess I want to close by saying, you know the statement, Tompkins County, 10 square miles surrounded by reality. Well, in this case, I think we're 10 square miles of reality surrounded by a lot of wishful thinking. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. Adam Law, and then Marie McCray.
Hi, my name is Adam Law. I thank the Chair and the members of the Tompkins County Legislature for allowing me 3 minutes to endorse the resolution prohibiting the leasing of county-owned land for natural gas drilling using high-volume hydro-fracking. It is my opinion as a physician and endocrinologist that hydraulic fracturing of shales represents a significant potential health hazard to humans. I have surveyed the literature on the health effects with Professor Madeleine Finkel from the Department of Public Health at Weill Cornell Medical College, and our peer-reviewed paper is in press currently with the American Journal of Public Health. The resolutions we make in Tompkins County are influential in the New York State level. On April the 23rd, 2010, I gave a presentation to the medical staff at the Cayuga Medical Center on the potential health effects of hydraulic fracturing. Dr. Judd Kilgore was in the audience. He subsequently proposed a resolution in favor of a moratorium at the Tompkins County Medical Society, and this was passed unanimously on June the 10th, 2010. On June the 26th, 66 physicians in Tompkins County paid for an advertisement calling for a moratorium. Between July the 13th and November the 26th this year, the Medical Society of Otsego, Broome, Oneida, Herkimer, Madison, Chenango, Oswego, Cayuga, Chemung, and Onondaga counties either signed resolutions or sent letters supporting a resolution, often using very similar wording to those in our advertisement in the original moratorium proposal to our county medical society. On October the 14th, the Family Health and Preventative Medicine Subcommittee of the Medical Society of the State of New York unanimously endorsed a moratorium on gas drilling. This was chaired by Dr. Jeffrey Moore, a local physician. On December the 9th, the Medical Society of the State of New York passed the following unanimous resolution. Resolved that the Medical Society of the State of New York supports a moratorium on natural gas extraction using high-volume hydraulic fracturing in New York State until valid information is available to evaluate the process for its potential effects on human health and the environment. This shows how local physicians of Tompkins County, concerned about the health effects of hydraulic fracturing of shales, has translated to a strong statement in favor of a moratorium at the state level. Let's do the same with one of these resolutions before the county legislature and start the ball rolling with this important precautionary statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Law. Marie McCray, and then Margaret McCaslin.
Good evening. I'm Marie McCray. I live in Dryden. And I too am proud to be here in front of a legislative group that is proposing a resolution prohibiting leasing county land for gas drilling. There are a lot of different phrases to describe this process, so I want to be very clear that what I'm talking about and what you're proposing banning on county-owned lands is the heavily industrialized process that involves drilling deep vertical holes into the earth and then drilling long horizontal legs off of each of those verticals. To extract the fossil fuel from deep underground layers, water, sand, and chemicals are then injected under high pressure into those well holes. Enough chemicals in each well to outweigh 3 elephants. This whole process is often called by the name high-volume slickwater hydraulic fracturing, But let's be clear here again that that phrase describes only one part of the entire industrialized process. There can be many unintended consequences from this drilling and extracting. No regulation can prevent the heavy metals and radioactive substances loosened by this process from coming up to the surface with the fossil fuel. No regulation can prevent 30 to 70% of the toxic chemicals from remaining underground. No regulation can predict or control the underground migration of toxic plumes. No regulation can prevent the extraordinary squandering of fresh water, 5.5 million gallons average per well, 100% of which becomes 100% contaminated. And this is in an era of diminishing availability of fresh water in the US and worldwide. No regulation in this era of economic plummet can magically find the billions needed to construct waste treatment plants that might be able to filter the toxic chemicals, heavy metals, and radioactive materials from the waste. No regulation is what New York State currently has for this process. None were proposed in the draft supplemental generic environmental impact statement, and I expect that none will be brought forth in the next incarnation of that document. As you deliberate tonight, please bear in mind the long-established record of oil and gas extraction corporations. For decades, they've been and continue to be rapacious, sloppy, and inhumane. There's only one way to render this practice safe, and that is to ban it outright. Anything less dooms us. I urge you to approve this drilling ban for Tompkins County-owned lands. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie. Margaret McCaslin.
Hi, I live in Lansing, but I've lived in many parts of Tompkins County. I have with me a list of all the lands that the county owns in different parts of Tompkins County. And I had not realized how many parts of the county is owned by the county. Many of you have probably heard that there are only 2 parts of Tompkins County that are potentially viable for drilling in the Marcellus Shale, and that's bits of Newfield and bits of Caroline. However, deep down below the Marcellus Shale is the Utica Shale, and it is drillable under all of Tompkins County, all of these places. And it's being regulated by exactly the same state guidelines that the Marcellus is being regulated. So that makes this ban even more important because it will protect not only those areas that might be drilled in the Marcellus for gas, but also those places that might be drilled in the Utica Shale. And the Utica Shale won't be the first place to be drilled because it's deeper down, it's going to be more expensive. But if the infrastructure comes to this area from Marcellus, it won't cost them much more to go after Utica. The other thing I'd like to mention is that Marie gave a good description of a well hole. But I want to mention another reason why it's really important you pass this. Each drilling pad is going to have 6, 8, sometimes even 16 or more well bores per drilling pad, because only an area in about 100-foot diameter off each horizontal line can be fractured to produce gas. So they go out in every direction. I call a typical drill pad with 8 arms a dirty octopus, but they often, if it's a thick layer, go down below that and do another 8, a double dirty octopus. And the amount of chemicals, the amount of fumes associated with over a dozen wells per drilling pad could be phenomenal. The last thing I want to mention is that gathering lines and treatment station, processing stations are also a very important part. And I don't know if this ban covers them or not, but I think it's very important that a subsequent ban address those also industrial activities.
Thank you. I'm Sarah Hess. I live in the city of Ithaca, and I won't repeat a lot of what my friends have said, but I thank you all for taking the issue of drilling on county lands to the table, for your thoughtful discussion, and for your vote on it tonight. Like Ellen Harrison, last week I went on a tour of Bradford County with 12 other people from Tompkins County, organized by Co-op Extension. Although I've been working on this issue for about 2 years, I was surprised by the things that I heard there, and I think some other people were too. I just want to mention some of the specifics. In Bradford County, we listened to a county commissioner, a supervisor of a town, and someone who was in charge of economic development. They said that the county services have increased, and the examples they gave were a 30% increase in police, fire, and ambulance services in response to traffic problems, accidents, DWIs, and various crimes. Trucks run 24 hours a day, so road safety is seriously impacted because of both the volume of traffic and because the drivers don't necessarily have experience with heavy loads on small roads, especially in winter conditions. Pennsylvania State Police find a high portion of trucks with safety problems when they do road checks. 10% of the probation department clients are from Texas and Oklahoma, along with 8 to 10% of those who are in the county jail. Of these clients, 95% are in for crimes that are related to alcohol and drug abuse. Housing costs have been particularly difficult for families and many individuals there. Costs have tripled and sometimes even more. An apartment, they gave an example, that rented for $250 now rents for $800 or $1,000. Obviously, this puts many individuals or families in a very unstable situation, and one of the results is that they've had an increase in children who are being placed in foster care. The courthouse has had to reduce their hours when deed searching can be done because they can't staff the amount of requests for information. And as Ellen said, because income from property taxes, and I should add that they only have income from property tax. They do not get a share of the state sales tax as we do in New York. But the income that they have from property tax is not nearly kept up with the increase in their expenses. And it's inevitable that they will be raising their taxes. They didn't say when, but the implication was sometime soon. At this point, they've stretched their dollars as far as they can. They gave examples of electronic monitoring to keep people out of jail and combining departments and doing all sorts of mitigation methods to try to deal with the cost increases. But obviously, it hasn't been enough, and they will be raising their taxes as they reported to us. Of course, some businesses
wrap up, sir.
Have benefited, but with each of the presenters, they listed as many negatives as they listed pluses in their assessments. So again, I thank all of you for all the work that you've done. I think I'm proud of a county that has paid a lot of attention to this, and thank you for your vote tonight.
Thank you, Sarah. Is there anyone else who'd like to address the legislature?
Resolution R, resolution prohibiting leasing of county-owned land for natural gas drilling using high-volume hydro-fracturing, and I so move.
And Carol seconds. Dooley.
Well, Pam called attention to a proposed amendment, so I would like to move the amendments. You all have it in your packet. I'm not quite sure how best to describe the amendments. It removes 2 whereases and a parenthetical phrase in another whereas. So that would be the 6th whereas gets rid of the parenthetical phrase 30 to 40 years. The 7th whereas disappears, and the 10th whereas disappears. It doesn't change the overall thrust of the resolution.
I consider that friendly.
And Carol?
I do
That's
too.
friendly. So that is now the motion that's on the floor.
I'd just like to ask, since the original resolution R showed votes at Planning, Development, Environmental Quality Committee and votes at Facilities and Infrastructure Committee, that involved no votes on the part of some legislators, whether and which resolution addresses any concerns that they might have had that led them to a no vote, so that I can make a more informed decision on which one of these to pick. Personally, I'll just say they had me at jeopardizing our water. And for me, a shorter one is fine, but I understand this is a consensus iterative process, and I'd like to have some clue as to where the consensus and iteration lies at this moment.
We had extensive discussion about this again, and the revised proposed amendment that Julie just described is the result of that discussion and addresses specifically the concerns that I had in voting no, and so I'm now committed to supporting this resolution as amended.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kathy, the reason I voted against it at the Planning Committee was a procedural one. I'm certainly not in favor of having the 556 acres of county lands drilled on. But I thought the county, any contract or any consideration that we'd have to give this process on county land would have to be passed, if you will, by this body. There's no way that the 15 of us are going to let this happen. There just isn't. We have spent a lot of time, good time, but a lot of people put a lot of time in on this, not just legislators, but county staff. And frankly, I think our time could have been spent more productively. We will come to the same conclusion, and here we are talking about it again. I'm not going to argue about the provisions, but it seems that everybody, this was like a Christmas tree. Everybody wanted to put something in, and I'm hoping at the appropriate time, Mike Lane will offer his as a substitute, but maybe he won't.
Kathy, I voted against this resolution in committee because I had nightmarish memories of discussion we had on the floor with gas drilling, where there were so many expert opinions on things that I didn't know about chemicals and all these things. So the two whereases that came out pretty much were the bone of contention for me. Although I also wanted something simpler that essentially just said, this is our land, we're not going to approve any of this, period, over and done with. Don't like it, it's bad for us, we're not going to do it. I just wanted something simpler. But I can live with a substitute resolution because it has taken out some of the assumptions, because things go both ways. We believe this, but not everybody does. And so it makes sense to me to vote on something that does not include these things that can be argued so strongly.
Mike, and then Carol.
I'm going to call a question.
Okay, question's been called. All in favor of ending the debate on this revised resolution, please raise your hand. Any opposed? So the question is called. That was unanimous. All in favor of the revised resolution R, please raise your hand. Any opposed? That carries 14 to 1.